The capital city of the Veyron Concord did not sit upon the ground so much as it hovered over it. A sprawling lattice of chrome temples and crystalline spires that defied gravity with an arrogance specific to the galaxy's ruling class. From the vantage point of the suspended sky bridges, the city looked like a circuit board woven from light and jewels, humming with the frenetic energy of 1 trillion credits moving in real time. But the crown jewel of this artificial horizon was the grand spiral arena. It floated above the city center like a jeweled blade, a massive rotating coliseum of white alloy and hard light projectors. It was not merely a stadium, it was the heart of the Concord's culture, a place where justice was performed as theater, and where the hierarchy of species was enforced through blood and betting slips. Lyra Vesh stood on the observation deck of the arena's executive spire, her reflection ghostly against the thick transparency of the viewport. She was stunning in the Veyron fashion, with skin the color of polished marble and eyes that held the sharp, predatory violet hue of her noble lineage. She wore the silk and steel formal wear of an arena liaison, a uniform that signaled both authority and servitude. To the public, she was the face of the games, poised and sharp-tongued, a woman who could silence a riot with a raised eyebrow. In private, she was terrified. Her hand drifted to the pocket of her coat, brushing against the cold, jagged edge of a data shard. It was encrypted with a cipher she had spent 6 months breaking, containing the flight telemetry of the shuttle crash that had killed her father. The official report called it a pilot error. The data in her pocket screamed sabotage, painting a trail of bribed mechanics and disabled sensors that led all the way back to the very building she was standing in. Lyra forced her hand away from the pocket. She could not afford to look nervous. Not today. Today was a spectacle, and the Concorde did not tolerate stage fright. A chime sounded soft but demanding. The holographic banners unfurling across the city skyline shifted from the gold of the Concorde to the crimson of the upcoming event. Giant, projected faces of roaring alien champions faded, replaced by the flickering, grainy images of the evening's designated victims. Humans. Lyra smoothed her expression into a mask of bored competence and turned away from the window. The door to her office slid open, revealing 2 heavily armored guards flanking a floating drone camera. Behind them walked Chancellor Vol Sarek. Sarek was a man who wore power like a second skin. He was tall, his features angular and severe, and he moved with the gliding grace of a predator that had forgotten what it was like to be hunted. As the architect of the Human Accession Amendment, he was the reason the city was buzzing with a particularly vicious kind of anticipation. "Liaison Vesh," Sarek said. His voice was smooth, lacking any warmth. "The preparations for tonight. Are they complete?" Lyra bowed her head slightly, a calculated gesture, not too low, not too stiff. "They are, Chancellor. The containment units are secure. The medical checks are finished. The subjects are ready for transport to the proving ring." Sarek walked past her to the window, looking out at the glittering expanse of his city. "Ready is not enough," he said. He did not look at her. "Tonight is not a standard exhibition. The vote on the amendment is in 3 days. The outlying systems are hesitating. They think humanity has potential. They think these hairless apes might actually be useful partners in the Concorde." He turned, his eyes narrowing. "I need them to see the truth. Lyra, I need them to see fear. I need them to see weakness. The crowd must laugh. Do you understand? If the galaxy laughs at them, the vote passes. Earth becomes a resource state, and we strip them of their voting rights before they can pollute our Senate with their primitive morality." Lyra kept her face impassive, though a cold knot tightened in her stomach. The cruelty was the point. It was always the point. The Grand Spiral Arena was not about sport. It was a machine for social control, disguised as entertainment. I have reviewed the roster, Lyra said, her voice steady. The humans we have acquired are suboptimal. Private security contractors captured during the border disputes, a few political dissidents, some shell-shocked veterans. They are malnourished and unequipped. They will not last 5 minutes against the house beasts. Good, Sarek said. Make it 3 minutes. But make those 3 minutes unforgettable. Humans must look weak. The crowd must laugh. The vote must pass. He stepped closer, his presence suffocating. Do not fail me, Lyra. Your family has suffered enough tragedy for 1 generation. It would be a shame if the Vesh name disappeared entirely. The threat hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Lyra watched him leave, the door sliding shut with a hiss that sounded like a snake striking. She waited 10 seconds, counting the beats of her own racing heart, before she exhaled. She had to get to the holding cells. The lower levels of the Grand Spiral Arena were a stark contrast to the chrome temples above. Here, the air smelled of ozone, unwashed bodies, and the copper tang of old blood. The walls were dark gray, damp with condensation, and the lighting flickered with the unstable hum of a power grid diverted to the massive projectors upstairs. Lyra walked down the central corridor of Section 9, her heels clicking a sharp rhythm on the metal grating. To her left and right, force fields shimmered, holding back the evening's entertainment. She passed a cell containing a 6-armed gladiator from the outer rim, who paced his cage with manic energy. She passed a tank where an aquatic predator pounded against the glass. And then, at the end of the hall, she reached the human containment block. It was depressing. There were 12 of them. They sat on the cold floor in varying states of disrepair. Their flight suits were torn, stained with grease and dirt. Some were nursing fresh bruises from the guards. Others just stared at the wall with the 1,000-yard stare of soldiers who knew they were already dead. They looked small, fragile. Lyra checked her datapad. This was the threat Sarek was so worried about? They looked like they would break if the wind blew too hard. She was about to turn away to signal the handlers to begin the prep when she saw him. He was sitting apart from the others, tucked into the shadow of a support pillar. He was not huddled like the rest. He was sitting cross-legged, his back straight, his hands resting loosely on his knees. He was not looking at the guards or the other prisoners. He was looking up at the ceiling, watching the rhythmic pulse of the arena's lighting conduits. His name, according to the manifest, was Rowan Hale. He was not physically imposing by Veyron standards. He had the compact, wire-strong build of a Gravity World native. His face was a map of old violence, a scar running through his left eyebrow, a nose that had been broken and reset at least twice. But it was his stillness that caught Lyra's attention. In a room full of panic and despair, he was terrifyingly calm. Lyra keyed the audio override for the force field and stepped closer to the barrier. "You are wasting your energy," she said. Rowan Hale did not jump. He lowered his gaze from the ceiling to her face, his movement slow and deliberate. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and devoid of the fear she was used to seeing. "I am just reading," he said. His voice was raspy, dry from lack of water. "Reading what?" Lyra asked. "The pattern," Rowan said. He gestured vaguely at the flickering conduit above. "The power cycles, the surge intervals. It is a language. Tells you where the heavy machinery is moving upstairs." Lyra stared at him. He was analyzing the arena's engineering through the vibration of a light fixture. "You are the one they call Hale," she stated, glancing at her pad. "Former security specialist. captured on the transit station during the initial blockade. Rowan shrugged one shoulder. That is what the file says. Lyra looked at him, really looked at him. There was something about him that irritated her. He should be begging. He should be crying. Or at the very least, he should be angry. Instead, he looked like a man waiting for a bus. She tapped a command on the console, and a holographic poster materialized inside the cell. It was the promotional image for tonight's event. It showed a grotesque caricature of a human, drooling, hunched, frightened, being crushed under the boot of a gleaming Varen champion. The text above it screamed in jagged neon letters, "Human Night, the end of the era." Rowan looked at the poster. He tilted his head to the side. Subtle, he noted. It is not meant to be subtle, Lyra said sharply. It is meant to be a statement. Rowan leaned forward, studying the holographic glitter that rained down from the virtual letters. Do they always advertise executions with glitter? He asked. The question was delivered with such dry, deadpan seriousness that Lyra felt a muscle in her cheek twitch. She almost smiled. She clamped the reaction down instantly. It is not an execution, she said. It is a proving. It is a slaughter, Rowan corrected gently. But the glitter is a nice touch. Very festive. Lyra deactivated the poster. She stepped as close to the field as she dared. She checked the sensors. They were alone in the audio loop. Listen to me. Hail, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. I do not have much time, and you have even less. The script for tonight is written. You are going to go out there. You are going to run, and you are going to die. The crowd wants a show. Rowan looked at her, his expression unreadable. I am not much of an actor, he said. I am offering you a choice, Lyra hissed, and when you get out there, do not fight. Do not try to be a hero. Just take the fall. If you stay down, if you make it look pathetic enough, I can pull strings. I can claim you are more valuable as a laborer. I can get you transferred to the helium mines in the outer belt. It is hard work. It is brutal. But you will be alive. It was the correct thing to do. It was the only mercy she could offer. A lifetime of slavery instead of a public death. Rowan looked at her for a long moment. He seemed to be measuring her, not physically but spiritually. It made Lyra feel exposed, as if he could see the encrypted data shard burning a hole in her pocket. Why? He asked. Why what? Why offer me a way out? Rowan asked. You are wearing their uniform. You organized this party. Lyra stiffened. I am trying to save your life. No, Rowan said. You are trying to save your conscience. There is a difference. He stood up then. He moved with a fluid economy of motion, ignoring the stiffness in his limbs. He walked to the force field, standing inches from the shimmering energy. He was not tall, but he held himself with a gravity that made him seem massive. I appreciate the offer, liaison, he said. But I think I will pass on the mines. You are choosing death, Lyra said, frustration rising in her throat. You are choosing to be a prop in their comedy. Do you not understand? They want to laugh at you. They want to prove you are nothing. Rowan looked past her, toward the heavy blast doors that led to the arena lift. Let them laugh, he said softly. He looked back at her, and his eyes were hard. Tell me, liaison, who benefits from the humiliation more? The crowd, or the people who fear what humans might become? The question hung in the dank air between them. It was a dangerous question. It was the kind of question that got people disappeared. It rattled Lyra because it echoed the very thoughts she had been suppressing since her father's shuttle fell out of the sky. Before she could answer, the blast doors hissed open. The roar of the crowd upstairs bled down into the corridor, a physical wave of sound that shook the dust from the ceiling pipes. "Time is up," a guard barked, stepping forward with a shock baton. "Move them out." Lyra stepped back, her heart pounding. She watched as the force fields dropped. The other humans stumbled out, terrified, herd animals being driven to the cliff. Rowan Hale stepped out last. He did not stumble. He adjusted the collar of his torn flight suit, rolled his shoulders, and walked into the corridor. He did not look back at her. The Grand Spiral Arena was a masterpiece of sensory overload. The seating tiers rose in a dizzying vertical slope, a canyon of spectators that numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Millions more watched via neural link from across the concord. The air was thick with the smell of expensive spices, sweat, and the ozone charge of the hard light shield dome that covered the ring. The arena floor was a shifting landscape of modular tiles, currently configured into a harsh, open plane of obsidian glass. Floating drone cams buzzed like angry hornets, projecting massive, distorted close-ups of the human prisoners onto the holographic banners above. Lyra stood in her private box, her knuckles white as she gripped the railing. She watched the procession. It was pathetic. It was exactly what Sarek wanted. The humans were marched out in a ragged line. They shielded their eyes against the blinding spotlights. The crowd bayed at them. It was not a cheer. It was a jeer, a deep, rhythmic sound of mockery that vibrated in the bones. Soft drone cams dipped low, pelting the prisoners with harmless but humiliating impact charges, puffs of colored smoke and glitter that burst on their skin, turning them into clowns. One of the older humans tripped and fell. The crowd roared with laughter. The drone zoomed in on his terrified face, projecting it 50 feet high, high above. The arena AI announcer's voice boomed through the stadium. It was a voice engineered to be hated and loved in equal measure, slick, manic, and dripping with contempt. "Ladies, gentlemen, and sentient slime molds of all quadrants," the announcer screamed, the audio levels pushing the limit of pain. "Welcome to the comedy event of the cycle. You have heard the rumors. You have seen the treaty proposals. But tonight, we answer the question. Does Earth belong in the stars or in the dirt?" The crowd chanted, "Dirt! Dirt! Dirt!" Lyra felt sick. She looked at Sarek's box across the stadium. He was smiling, holding a glass of wine, watching the poll numbers on the amendment tick upward in real time. On the arena floor, the humans huddled together in the center of the obsidian plain. They were terrified. They were waiting for the beast to be released. All except one. Rowan Hale stood at the edge of the group. He was not shielding his eyes. He was looking up at the announcer's booth. He was looking at the crowd. He was wiping the glitter from his shoulder with a slow, deliberate brush of his hand. The announcer ramped up the rhythm, the script scrolling across the massive monitors. "Look at them shiver. Look at them shake. We promised you warriors, but we brought you weeping willows. History tells us they are fighters, but the eyes do not lie. Oh, how the mighty fall before they even stand." The crowd's laughter was a physical weight. It pushed down on the arena floor. "Yes, my friends," the announcer crowed, setting up the tagline that was plastered on every piece of merchandise in the city. Galactic arena crowds mocked human warriors. It was a statement of fact. It was a history lesson written by the victors. And then, Rowan moved. He did not run. He stepped away from the huddled group of prisoners. He took 3 long strides toward the center of the ring, placing himself between the humans and the dark tunnel where the house champion waited. He squared his shoulders. He planted his feet. He lifted his chin. The movement was so contradictory to the atmosphere that it caused a ripple of confusion in the front rows. A man who is about to be eaten does not stand like that. A victim does not occupy space with that kind of certainty. Rowan looked into the nearest drone cam. His face was projected onto the sky, 10 stories tall. He was not sneering. He was not grimacing. He was calm, a terrifying absolute stillness. "I am right here," he said. He did not shout. He did not need to. The arena's acoustic pickups caught the words and amplified them, booming them out over the confused silence. "I will take the proving ring," Rowan said, "alone." For a second, there was silence. Then the crowd erupted, but it was not the laughter Sarek had ordered. It was a chaotic mix of shock, amusement, and insult. Who was this ape to dictate the terms? Who was he to speak to the announcer? In the control booth, the arena AI faltered. The script had been broken. The algorithm was searching for a response, scanning the biometric data of the human standing in the light. Lyra watched the diagnostic overlay on her screen. The AI was confused. It was designed to detect fear, adrenaline, panic. It fed on those metrics to adjust the lighting and the music for maximum drama. But the readout for Rowan Hale was flat. Scanning. The AI's voice dipped, losing its manic edge for a fraction of a second. Subject pulse, steady, cortisol levels nominal, combat intent unusually coherent. Lyra stared at the figure in the ring. A strange sensation washed over her. It wasn't pity. She had felt pity for the others. This was something sharp, something dangerous. Recognition. She recognized that stillness. She had seen it in the mirror every morning since she found out her father was murdered. It was the look of someone who had realized that the world was a lie and had decided to survive it anyway. It was the look of someone who had nothing left to lose but their dignity, and who would burn the world down to keep it. The AI recovered its composure, but the tone had shifted. It wasn't mocking anymore. It was intrigued. The crowd sensed it too. The laughter died down, replaced by a low, hungry buzz. The narrative had changed. It wasn't a comedy anymore. The announcer, programmed to adapt to the energy of the room, improvised. The voice boomed out again, but this time, there was a thrill in the digital tone, a dark excitement that electrified the air. The script had been, Galactic arena crowds mocked human warriors. Rowan stood in the center of the light, a single speck of defiance against a million screaming gods. The announcer finished the sentence, the words echoing like a gavel strike, until one stepped into the ring. The proving ring did not just want Rowan Hale dead, it wanted him erased. The configuration for the first match was a triple-threat gauntlet, a setup usually reserved for high-level execution scenarios where the outcome was a foregone conclusion. The floor of the arena had fractured into 3 concentric rings, each rotating at a different speed. Gravity was no longer a constant. It shifted in violent, sickening waves, one moment heavy enough to crush bone, the next light enough to send a careless fighter drifting into the path of the ceiling scrubbers. And then there were the blade drones. They were silver spheres the size of melons, humming with a high-pitched whine that set teeth on edge. They orbited the center of the ring in a chaotic cloud, deploying monofilament razors that could slice through alloy as if it were smoke. But the true centerpiece of the execution was the champion. The Varen crowd roared as the gates ground open and the gilded myriad stepped out. It was a synthetic organism, a towering sculpture of gold, chrome, and hydraulics, built with 4 arms and a sensor suite designed to track a heartbeat through a concrete wall. It did not carry weapons. It was a weapon, high above in the executive control booth. Lyra Vesh watched the telemetry feeds with a dryness in her throat that no amount of water could cure. The odds of human survival were calculated at 0.04%. She did not like those odds. Lyra tapped her fingers across the haptic interface of her console. She was not supposed to interfere. Her role was strictly observational. But she knew the code of the arena better than the engineers who built it. She found the subroutine controlling the blade drones. With a few subtle keystrokes, she attempted to widen their patrol radius by 2 degrees. It was a tiny adjustment, invisible to the naked eye, but it would give Rowan a pocket of safety near the Sector 4 pylon. She pressed enter. The system flashed green, accepting the command. Then, a split second later, it flashed red. Lyra frowned. She tried again, rerouting the command through a maintenance back door. Again, the system accepted it, and again, the code reverted instantly. It was not an error message. It was a correction. The code text scrolled backward and rewrote itself in real time, locking the drones back onto their lethal trajectory. Lyra pulled her hand back as if the console had burned her. The arena was not just rejecting her input, it was anticipating it. It felt less like a computer glitch and more like an immune system attacking a virus. The building itself was alive, and it wanted blood. Down in the ring, the gilded myriad lunged. The crowd screamed, a wall of sound that vibrated the glass of the booth. The champion covered the distance in a blur of gold motion, its lower arms reaching to crush the human into paste. Rowan did not run away. He did not brace for impact. He stepped to the left. It was a small movement, almost casual. He stepped onto the edge of the second rotating ring just as the gravity shifted. The floor surged upward, creating a localized gravity well. The gilded myriad, heavy with armor and momentum, could not adjust. Its massive fist hammered into the ground where Rowan had been standing a fraction of a second before, shattering the obsidian tile. Rowan used the impact tremor to launch himself. He did not jump at the champion. He jumped at the drones. The crowd gasped. The human was flying straight into the swarm of razors. But Rowan had been watching the lights. He had been reading the pattern. He knew the rhythm of the machine. He twisted in midair, passing through the gap Lyra had tried to create, the gap the arena had tried to close. He caught the underside of a drone, using its own gyroscopic force to swing himself around, turning his momentum into a weapon. He landed on the champion's back. The gilded myriad thrashed, its sensors screaming. But Rowan was already moving. He jammed a piece of debris, a shard of the shattered obsidian tile, into the exposed hydraulic joint at the base of the machine's neck. It was not a fatal blow, but it was precise. The champion froze, its primary servo loop severed. It stumbled, one of its massive arms swinging wildly, slicing through the air and knocking 2 of the blade drones into the gravity well. The drones exploded in a shower of sparks. The champion fell to one knee, screeching metal on metal. Rowan landed in the center of the ring, breathing hard but standing tall. He looked up, not at the champion, but at the executive booth. The laughter in the stadium died instantly. There is a specific sound a crowd makes when their amusement turns into something darker. It is the sound of a joke being ruined. They had come to see a clown slip on a banana peel. Instead, they were watching a grandmaster play chess with a sledgehammer. The silence stretched for a heartbeat, and then it broke, not into applause but into fury. "Kill him!" a voice shrieked from the lower tiers. "Break him!" They did not want him to win. They wanted him punished for the audacity of competence. Lyra stared down at the man in the ring. He was not winning with superpowers. He was winning with geometry. He was using the arena's own physics against it. A chime sounded at her door. It was not a request for entry. Chancellor Vol Sarek did not come himself. He sent his personal adjutant. a pale Veyron with a datapad and a smile that looked like a jagged wound. "Liaison Vesh," the adjutant said, stepping into the booth. "The Chancellor is displeased." Lyra turned, composing her face. "The human is surviving." "Is that not the point of approving?" "The point is the narrative," the adjutant snapped. "You are allowing suspense. Suspense implies equality. Suspense implies that the outcome is in doubt. The Chancellor does not pay for doubt." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. He also noticed the anomaly in the drone subroutines. He assumes it was a system glitch. But if such a glitch happens again, well, your family's remaining estates are already heavily leveraged. It would be tragic if the bank called in those debts tomorrow. Your mother would have nowhere to live. Lyra felt the blood drain from her face. It was a precise, surgical threat. "Fix the narrative, Vesh," the adjutant said, turning to leave. "Or we will fix it for you." Lyra retreated to her private quarters deep within the spire. It was the only place without cameras, or so she hoped. She paced the length of the room, her hands shaking. She needed a drink. She needed a weapon. She needed to scream. "Nice place," a voice chirped. "A little sterile for my taste. Needs more plants. Or maybe a rug that isn't made of hard light." Lyra spun around, reaching for the stun baton she kept under her desk. "Who is there?" "Down here, boss." A tiny drone, no larger than a hummingbird, hovered above her datapad. It was shaped like a teardrop, painted a matte black that seemed to absorb the light. It bobbed in the air with a sassy sort of buoyancy. "I am not hacking," the drone said quickly. "I am liberating information. There is a distinction." Lyra lowered the baton slightly. "Identify yourself." "Designation PIP-7, the drone said. "Primary function, archives and historical preservation. Secondary function, annoying authority figures." "I have been watching you. Liaison, you tried to save the meat sack in the ring." "I did no such thing," Lyra said automatically. "Right," the drone drawled, "and I am just a toaster with a personality complex. Look, we do not have time for the denial dance. You are investigating the arena." "So am I." Lyra hesitated. She knew of these drones, autonomous archivists left over from the pre-conquered era. They were illegal, rare, and notoriously difficult to catch. "What do you know?" Lyra asked. Pip flew over to the holographic display wall and interfaced with the port. A stream of data cascaded across the screen. Financial records, energy output graphs, and architectural schematics that dated back centuries. "I followed the money," Pip said. "The betting guilds are a front. The ticket sales are a rounding error. The real money is coming from a black budget account linked to the Department of Defense, and it is all being funneled into the basement." Lyra stepped closer to the screen. "What is in the basement?" Pip highlighted a massive, spherical structure buried 2 miles beneath the arena floor. "The Oath engine," Pip said. "Old tech, pre-conquered. It was designed to bind civilizations together. But the conquered, they jury-rigged it." Lyra read the energy signatures. The engine was not running on fusion or antimatter. It was running on bioelectric resonance. "It eats feelings," Pip said, dropping the humor for a moment. "Specifically, high-amplitude negative emotion, fear, humiliation, despair. That is why they do not just kill the humans. A quick death is useless. They need the crowd to hate, and they need the victim to suffer. It is a battery, Lyra. The whole arena is a battery." Lyra stared at the schematic. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her father hadn't just stumbled onto corruption, he had stumbled onto a power plant fueled by torture. "And now," Pip added, "the human, Rowan, he is a problem, nor he is not generating the right kind of juice. He is too..." Stable. He is calm, Lyra whispered. Exactly. And calmness is bad for business. So they have changed his status. Pip pulled up a new file. Rowan's designation had been updated. The red stamp of liquidation had been replaced with a purple stamp. Marketable anomaly. What does that mean? Lyra asked. It means he is too valuable to kill quickly, Pip said. They are going to milk him. They are going to drag this out. Make it harder. Make it hurt more. Until he breaks. He is not a person anymore. Lyra. He is a product. The medical bay smelled of antiseptic and ozone. It was a cold, white room where the arena's property was repaired for the next usage. Rowan sat on the edge of the bio-bed, his flight suit stripped to the waist. His torso was a map of bruising, deep purples and angry reds. A long, jagged laceration ran down his left arm where a drone had grazed him. Lyra stood beside him, a suture laser in her hand. She had dismissed the medical droids. She told the guards she wanted to inspect the damage personally to ensure he was fit for the next round. The truth was, she didn't trust the droids not to implant a behavior modification chip while they stitched him up. Hold still, she said. Her voice clipped and professional. Rowan did not flinch as the laser knitted his skin back together. He watched her. His gaze was heavy, physical. It made the air in the small room feel dense. You are good at that, he said. Lyra focused on the wound. It is a basic procedure. No, Rowan said. I mean the mask. You wear it well. Lyra's hand slipped, the laser searing a millimeter of healthy skin. She pulled back, exhaling sharply. I do not know what you are talking about. Rowan looked at her hands. They were trembling. It was a fine tremor, barely visible, but he saw it. You keep your voice sharp so nobody notices your hands shaking, he said. It is a smart move. Fear looks like anger if you squint hard enough. Lyra snapped the laser off. She slammed it onto the metal tray. You are presumptuous, Hale. You think because you survived one match you understand this world. You understand nothing. You are a rat in a maze, and I am the one holding the cheese. Do not mistake my presence here for kindness. She turned away, breathing hard. Her defenses were high, a fortress of ice she had built over 3 years of silence. Rowan did not apologize. He did not retreat. I never said you were kind, he said quietly. I said you were scared. Lyra spun back to face him. Her eyes flashed with violet fire. I am keeping you alive. Do you have any idea what they will do to you now? You are not just meat anymore. You are a challenge. They will tear you apart piece by piece to see what makes you tick. She stopped, realizing she was shouting. She lowered her voice, the anger bleeding out into exhaustion. I am not your savior. Rowan, I cannot save you. Rowan slid off the table. He stood close to her. Too close. The heat coming off his body was palpable. He smelled of sweat and burnt ozone and something uniquely human, salt and iron. He looked down at her. His eyes were not pleading. They were steady. Good, he said. I do not need saving. I need a partner. The word hung between them. Partner. It was an intimate word in a city of masters and slaves. Lyra looked up at him. For a second, the gap between their worlds vanished. There was no noble Varen liaison, no human prisoner. There were just two people trapped in the belly of a beast. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. The attraction was a physical ache, a magnetic pull that terrified her more than the Chancellor's threats. Before she could answer, before she could make the mistake of wanting this, the monitor on the wall buzzed. It was a priority news alert from the capital. Lyra stepped back, breaking the tension. She tapped the screen. The image that appeared was grainy, styled to look like a leaked confession tape. It showed Rowan Hale, sitting in a dark room. But the lighting was different. He looked younger, harder. "I acted alone," the digital Rowan said. The voice was perfect. The inflection was perfect. "The attack on the Varen transport was necessary. We will burn their cities until they understand. Humanity is not here to join. We are here to conquer." Lyra stared at the screen. It was a deep fake, a masterpiece of synthetic media. Rowan watched his own face confess to terrorism. He did not look surprised. "They are playing this for the Earth diplomats," he said. Lyra nodded, her mind racing. "The vote. They are using this to justify the amendment. If the diplomats believe this, they will sign the treaty. Earth becomes a resource state by sunrise." She looked at Rowan. The partner offer was no longer a theoretical choice. It was the only play left on the board. "We need proof," Lyra said. "Real proof. Not just data shards I can steal, but something undeniable." "Pip says the core of the Oath engine is beneath the ring," Rowan said. Lyra nodded. "But the lift is bio-locked. Only the Grand Champion has clearance to access the lower sanctum for the victory rites." Rowan looked at the door, then back at her. "Then I guess I have to become the Grand Champion." It was an insane plan. It required him to win impossible matches, to survive the escalating cruelty of the arena, and to stay alive long enough to reach the final tier. "You will have to fight," Lyra said, "and not just defend yourself. You will have to play their game." "I will fight," Rowan said, "but not for them." He reached out and took her hand. His skin was rough, calloused. Hers was smooth and cool. The contrast sent a shock through her system. "I will get you to the core." "Lyra." "But you have to keep me in the ring. Can you do that?" Lyra looked at his hand holding hers. "It was an act of treason. It was an act of war." "I can do that," she whispered. The horn sounded from the upper decks. The intermission was over. Lyra watched from the shadows of the tunnel entrance as Rowan walked back out into the blinding light. The crowd was screaming again, a wall of noise that wanted blood. He paused at the edge of the light and looked back. He didn't wave. He just found her in the dark, held her gaze for 1 second and nodded. Lyra felt a cold shiver trace down her spine. The danger wasn't just the arena anymore. It wasn't just Sarek or the Oath engine or the political collapse of her species. The danger was the way her heart hammered against her ribs when he looked at her. She was starting to care. And in the grand spiral arena, caring was the fastest way to get killed. Rowan stepped into the ring. The gates slammed shut. Lyra turned and ran for the lift. She had a system to hack. The weeks that followed were a blur of violence and neon. Rowan Hale did not just survive the arena, he haunted it. The matches ceased to be sporting events and mutated into complex, high-velocity puzzles designed to dismantle a human being in real time. In the 3rd week, the floor of the ring dissolved into an archipelago of floating magnetic platforms, suspended over a gravity well that simulated the crushing pressure of a gas giant's core. Rowan fought a pack of cyberhounds, creatures of chrome and instinct that hunted in synchronized algorithms. He didn't kill them. He lured them onto a destabilized platform and shot out the maglev coupling, sending them tumbling into the suppression field below, trapped but alive. In the 4th week, the arena deployed the illusion fields. The air shimmered with hard light holograms, projecting nightmares drawn from Rowan's own psychological profile. Burning cities, screaming allies, the face of the commander who had surrendered Earth. He fought through the phantoms with a grim, shut-down efficiency, trusting the vibration of the floor beneath his feet more than the lies in his eyes. And through it all, the noise changed. The arena AI, sensing the shift, weaponized the audience. It began pumping subsonic frequencies through the stadium speakers, aggression amplifiers designed to spike adrenaline and cortisol in the spectators. It turned the applause into a physical weapon, a rhythmic thrum that rattled teeth and clouded judgment. The goal was to drown out the thinking part of the brain and leave only the lizard brain, hungry for blood. But the crowd was no longer a monolith. High in the nosebleed sections, in the cheap seats where the dock workers, the sanitation drones, and the non-voting species sat, the laughter had died. It was replaced by a tense, vibrating silence. Then, a murmur. Then, a roar. They saw a human man refusing to play the role of the victim. They saw him limp away from a neuro-whip duel, bleeding and burned, and instead of raising his fists in victory, he knelt to check the pulse of the opponent he had just knocked unconscious. It was a small gesture. In the Varen Concord, mercy was a sign of a defective product. But to the thousands of invisible workers who kept the floating city in the sky, it looked like something else. It looked like dignity. Ravesh sat in the subterranean hum of a maintenance server room, 3 levels below her office. The air was frigid, kept at 0 degrees to cool the massive processor banks. She wore a heavy coat over her silk liaison uniform, her breath pluming in white clouds as she watched the data stream on Pip's projection. "We are looking at this wrong," Pip said. The drone was plugged directly into a severed fiber optic cable, his optical sensor spinning with processing effort. "We thought the arena was just a torture chamber, a place to harvest pain." "Is it not?" Lyra asked, rubbing warmth into her arms. "The energy spikes correlate with the matches." Pip projected a graph. The lines were jagged, red and angry. "Look at the peaks," Pip said. "The energy harvest does not spike when Rowan bleeds. It spikes when he is humiliated. It spikes when the crowd feels contempt. But look here." Pip highlighted a strange blue trough in the data. "This was Tuesday," Pip explained, "during the match with the illusion fields. Rowan realized the burning city was fake. He stopped fighting. He just stood there and closed his eyes. The crowd got confused. The mockery stopped. And the energy output, it inverted." "Inverted?" "The Oath engine did not draw power," Pip said. "It leaked it." Lyra leaned forward, staring at the blue line. It looked like a heartbeat. "The archive fragments I stole are corrupted," Pip continued, his voice dropping the usual sarcasm. "But I managed to translate the constructor logs from the civilization that built this thing. The precursors. They did not build a weapon. They built a courthouse." "A courthouse," Lyra repeated. "The Oath engine," Pip said. "It detects truth of intent. It was designed to bind leaders to their promises. If a king stood on that seal and vowed to protect his people, the engine would read his bioelectric resonance. If he meant it, the engine would amplify his will, broadcasting the truth of his intent to every witness. It creates a consensus reality." "And if he lied?" Lyra asked. "The engine would know," Pip said, "and it would consume him." Lyra looked up at the ceiling, imagining the massive ring far above their heads. The Concord found this machine buried in the crust of the planet. They didn't know how to use it to bind truth. So they rewired it. They reversed the polarity. Instead of amplifying truth, they used it to harvest the bioelectricity of 1 billion beings engaging in a shared lie. The lie that some species are masters and others are meat. "It is a dissonance engine," Lyra whispered. "It feeds on the gap between what is right and what is happening. That is why they need the mockery. That is why they need the humiliation. And that is why Rowan is dangerous," Pip said. "When he refuses to be humiliated, he cuts the fuel line." Lyra paced the small room. The implications were terrifying. If the engine reacted to true intent, then Rowan wasn't just disrupting the show. He was interacting with the machine's original programming. "We have to tell him," Lyra said. "We have to do more than that." Pip said, "We have to keep him alive." "I am picking up chatter on the security bans. Sarek is losing patience. The vote on the human accession amendment is in 48 hours. He needs a finale." Lyra stopped pacing. "What kind of finale?" "The kind where nobody walks away," Pip said. The atmosphere in the city was brittle. The holographic banners that usually advertised luxury goods and off-world vacations had been overridden. Pip had been busy. Lyra walked across the sky bridge toward the residential sector, her eyes scanning the digital skyline. Suddenly, a massive advertisement for Veyron pure water flickered and dissolved. In its place, giant block letters appeared, projected in a cheerful, harmless font. "Welcome to Honesty Day. Try not to lie to your spouse," a few blocks away. A recruitment poster for the Concord Security Forces, Strength and Unity, glitched and was replaced by, "The helmet is to hide the fact that we are sleeping." People on the bridge stopped, pointing and laughing. It was a small rebellion, a mosquito bite on the side of a giant, but it broke the tension. It made the Concord look fallible. Lyra did not smile. She was too busy watching her own shadow. She knew she was being followed. Sarek's spies were clumsy, arrogant in their belief that she was trapped, but they were there. She took a service lift up to the spire's maintenance balcony, a wind-swept platform of great metal that overlooked the neon ocean of the city below. Rowan was waiting for her. He looked worse than he had a week ago. The bruising on his ribs had turned a sickly yellow-green. There was a fresh cut on his cheekbone, sealed with medical glue. He was leaning against the railing, looking down at the rivers of light that flowed through the city canyons. "You are late," he said, but there was no heat in it. "I had to shake a tail," Lyra said. She moved to stand beside him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his jacket, but careful not to touch. They stood in silence for a long moment. The wind whipped Lyra's hair across her face. She tucked it behind her ear, her hand lingering on her neck. "Pip found something," she said. "The arena. It is reacting to you." "I know," Rowan said quietly. "You know? I can feel it," he said. He looked at his hands, turning them over. "When I am in the ring, when I stop fighting the way they want me to fight, the floor feels different. It hums, like it is waking up. And the light?" Lyra nodded. "We saw the data. Last match, when you spared the illusion beast, the sensors picked up a photon discharge, an aurora. It felt like it was waiting for me to speak," Rowan said. Lyra turned to face him. The wind howled around the spire, isolating them in a bubble of noise and cold. "Rowan," she said, "Sarek is planning something. The next match. It is not going to be a game." "I figured," Rowan said. He finally looked at her. His eyes were dark, exhausted, but alive. Lyra felt a crack in the armor she had worn for 3 years. She looked at this human, this broken, stubborn, impossible man, and felt a terrifying wave of vertigo. "I cannot lose you," she said. The words tumbled out before she could check them. Rowan went still. He looked at her, searching her face. "You need me for the plan," he said. "No," Lyra said sharply, her voice trembling. "Not for the plan." She gripped the railing, her knuckles white. "My father," she said, staring out at the city. "He believed in the conquered. He believed that if you followed the rules, if you were honorable, the system would protect you." He died screaming in a burning shuttle because he asked a question someone did not like. I have not trusted a single living soul since that day. I have been alone in a room full of people for 1,000 days. She turned back to him, her eyes fierce and wet. And then you showed up. You, with your stupid refusal to die, you, standing in a cage and making jokes about glitter. Rowan watched her, his expression softening. I am not a hero, Lyra, he said. I know, she said. Heroes are boring. You are something else. Rowan stepped closer. The distance between them evaporated. The air felt charged, heavy with the unsaid. Do you want to know why I am calm? Rowan asked softly. Lyra nodded, unable to speak. Because I made a promise, he said. The first night, in the cells. I listened to the others crying. I smelled the fear. And I promised myself that no matter what they did to me, no matter how much they cut me or starved me or paraded me around, I would not let them turn me into a monster. I would not become the animal they say I am. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face. He waited. A silent question. Lyra closed the gap. She leaned into his touch, her cheek pressing against his rough palm. That is a dangerous promise, she whispered. The only kind worth keeping, Rowan said. He kissed her. It was not a soft, cinematic kiss. It was fierce and desperate. It tasted of blood and adrenaline and the terrifying realization that they were both standing on the edge of a cliff. It was a collision of two people who had been hollowed out by grief and had found the one thing that could fill the space. Lyra gripped the lapels of his jacket, pulling him closer, anchoring herself to him. For a moment, the city, the conquered, the vote, it all ceased to exist. There was only the heat of his mouth and the solid reality of his body against hers. It felt like a vow, a seal breaking, when they pulled apart, breathless. Lyra rested her forehead against his chest. She could hear his heart beating, steady, strong, defiant. We are going to burn it down, she said into his coat. The whole damn arena. We will, Rowan said. He kissed the top of her head. But first, I have to survive tomorrow. The high lasted exactly 40 minutes. Lyra returned to her executive suite, her mind racing with plans, her body still humming with the memory of his touch. She keyed the lock code. The door slid open. She stopped. The suite had been torn apart. The furniture was overturned. The silk tapestries were slashed. The hidden panel in the wall, where she kept her father's data shards and the encrypted drive Pip had given her, had been ripped out of the bulkhead. Empty. Every scrap of evidence, every financial trail, every record of the Oath Engine's true nature. Gone. Lyra stood in the wreckage of her life. She did not scream. She felt a cold, deadly clarity settle over her. It wasn't a random burglary. They hadn't taken the jewelry or the credits. They had taken the leverage. A message blinked on her wall monitor. It was a simple text string, unsigned. Focus on the game. Liaison Vesh. The ending is already written. She had been betrayed. Someone in her inner circle, one of the few aides she thought she could trust, had sold her out to Sarek. She was naked, vulnerable. If she acted now, they would arrest her for treason. If she ran, they would kill Rowan. There was only one way forward. The only way out was through. The next night, the Grand Spiral Arena was louder than Lyra had ever heard it. The air was electric with a mix of bloodlust and revolution. The lower tiers were chanting Rowan's name. The upper tiers, the wealthy Varen elite, were screaming for his death. It was a civil war played out in decibels. The ring configuration was simple. No shifting tiles, no gravity wells, just a flat white circle of stone. And in the center, the champion of pure blood honor. His name was Kalen, a Varen gladiator who had been a national hero for a decade. but he wasn't the man on the posters anymore. As he stepped into the light, Lyra saw the truth. He was a monstrosity. His skin was gray and distended, stretched tight over illegal subdermal armor plating. His eyes were replaced by targeting optics that glowed a hellish red. His arms were reinforced with hydraulic pistons that whined audibly even over the crowd. He was drug-fueled, cyber-stitched, and stripped of anything resembling a soul. He was the embodiment of the Concord's lie, purity achieved through corruption. Rowan entered the ring. He looked small. He wore no armor, only the standard-issue canvas trousers and a tunic. The announcer did not crack a joke. The AI voice was low, solemn. The final lesson begins. Conformity is survival. Deviance is death. The bell rang. Kalen moved with a speed that shouldn't have been possible for something that size. He struck Rowan with a backhand blow that sent the human skidding 50 feet across the stone. Rowan rolled, coming up to his feet, but he was limping. The fight was brutal. It wasn't a match. It was a beatdown. Kalen didn't use technique. He used overwhelming force. He caught Rowan by the throat and slammed him into the ground. The stone cracked. Rowan gasped, blood spraying from his mouth. "Get up," Lyra whispered from her booth, her hands pressed against the glass. "Please get up." Rowan scrambled away, dodging a stomp that would have crushed his skull. He was fast, but he was fading. He landed a punch on Kalen's midsection, but it was like hitting a tank. The subdermal plating absorbed the impact instantly. Kalen laughed. It was a wet, gurgling sound. "Is this your hero?" Kalen shouted to the crowd. "Is this your god?" He grabbed Rowan by the arm and twisted. There was a sickening pop. Rowan cried out, his left arm hanging uselessly at his side. The lower tiers went silent. The hope was being beaten out of them, blow by blow. Kalen dragged Rowan toward the center of the arena, toward the great seal of the Varen Concord etched into the floor. "Kneel," Kalen commanded. He kicked the back of Rowan's legs, forcing him down onto the seal. "Kneel and beg for the Chancellor's mercy." Rowan was on his knees. Blood dripped from his nose onto the white stone of the seal. He was shaking. Kalen raised a fist, the hydraulic pistons hissing as they charged for a killing blow. "Say it!" Kalen roared. "Say you are nothing." Rowan looked up. His left eye was swollen shut. He spat blood onto the seal. He looked at Kalen. Then he looked past him, up at the booth where Lyra was watching. He didn't speak to Kalen. He spoke to the floor, to the machine beneath the stone. "I am not nothing," Rowan rasped. It wasn't a shout. It was a statement of fact. "And I will not hate you," Rowan said. "Even now." It was the truth. It was the absolute, unvarnished truth of his intent. He refused to hate the monster in front of him. He felt only a profound, crushing sadness for what they had done to this man. The oath engine heard him. The blood on the seal hissed. Suddenly, the white stone turned translucent. A deep, resonant thrum shook the entire stadium, louder than the crowd, deeper than the subsonic speakers. Kalen froze. His targeting optics flickered. Light, pure, blinding, aurora violet light erupted from the seal. It didn't burn, it washed over them. It shot upward, a pillar of radiance that pierced the hard light dome and stabbed into the night sky. The arena went silent. It was an impossible hush. 100,000 people stopped breathing at the same time. The noise, the music, the aggression algorithms, everything was swallowed by the light. In the Chancellor's box, Volseric stood up, knocking over his wine glass. "Cut the feed," he screamed. "Kill the power." But nothing happened. The controls were dead. The pillar of light twisted, forming symbols in the air. Giant, burning glyphs from a language that hadn't been spoken in 1,000 years. Pip, hovering in Lyra's booth, spun his optical sensor wildly. "I am translating," Pip shrieked. It is precursor syntax. High dialect. What does it say? Lyra whispered, staring at the light. The glyphs hung in the sky, burning the retinas of every sentient being in the capital. Pip's voice came through the speaker, trembling. It says, a vow must be witnessed. Rowan was still kneeling in the center of the pillar. The light didn't hurt him. It seemed to cradle him. Kalen, the cyborg champion, stumbled back, shielding his eyes, his illegal augmentation sparking and malfunctioning in the presence of the pure bioelectric surge. Lyra stared at the scene. The crowd wasn't rioting. They were watching. They were mesmerized. For the first time in history, the arena wasn't broadcasting a lie. It was broadcasting a truth so powerful it had physically manifested as light. She looked at the pillar, and then she looked at Sarek's box. The Chancellor was terrified. He wasn't looking at Rowan with contempt anymore. He was looking at him with the panic of a man who realizes the gun he is holding is pointed backward. Lyra realized then that they had been wrong. The arena wasn't just a weapon to oppress the masses. It was a microphone. And for the first time in centuries, someone had just turned it on. The champion's procession was the loudest event in the Varen calendar. It was a parade of excess, a sprawling, chaotic march of golden floats, captive beasts, and holographic titans that wound its way through the upper districts of the capital before circling the grand spiral arena. The noise was deafening, a cacophony of trumpets and synthesized cheers that vibrated the very foundations of the city. It was the perfect cover for a burglary. While the eyes of the Concord were fixed on the sky, looking at the fireworks and the preening gladiators, a small, impossible team gathered in the shadow of a waste disposal airlock 3 levels below the VIP boxes. Lyra Vesh looked at her recruits. If Vol Sarek knew this was the force coming to dismantle his empire, he would have laughed until he choked. There was Dr. Skick, a disgraced insectoid medic from the hive worlds of the Outer Rim. He stood on 4 chitinous legs, his mandibles clicking with nervous energy. He had lost his medical license for refusing to euthanize injured workers, and he carried a satchel full of unauthorized stimulants and bone knitters. Next to him was Marlowe, a dock worker union leader with skin like granite and hands the size of shovels. She represented the unseen labor that kept the floating city aloft, and she looked ready to punch a hole through a bulkhead. And finally, there was Orin. He was an old Varen, his skin sagging, his eyes clouded with cataracts. He was the retired chief engineer of the arena's lower levels. He had spent 40 years building the cages, and the last 10 years drinking to forget them. This is insanity, Orin muttered, adjusting the optical spectacles that magnified his failing vision. The core is not a vault. It is a biological hazard zone. The security systems down there do not just shoot you, they digest you. We have a guide, Rowan said. He was checking the charge on a magnetic grapple gun Lyra had stolen from the armory. Orin squinted at the human. You mean the floating toaster? Pip buzzed indignantly near Orin's ear. I am an archival preservation unit with military-grade encryption cracking protocols, Pip corrected. And I take offense to the toaster comment. My heating element is purely for self-defense. We are wasting time, Lyra said, her voice cutting through the banter. She wore a dark gray technician's flight suit, stripped of her liaison insignia. The procession passes the North Quadrant in 12 minutes. That is when the seismic sensors will be blind. We move then. She looked at the group. We are not going down there to destroy the arena, she said. Not yet. We are going down to steal the truth. If we fail, Sarek wins. The amendment passes and Earth falls. But if we succeed, we break the wheel. Marlowe cracked her knuckles. It sounded like stones grinding together. Let us break it, then, the dock worker said. The maintenance tunnels were the black metal ribs of the beast. They were narrow, suffocating passages that wound between the massive magnetic coils keeping the stadium afloat. The air here was hot and smelled of ozone and burning dust. Rowan took the lead, moving with a silent, prowling grace that unsettled Orin. Lyra followed close behind, with the others trailing. They moved through sections of the arena that the public never saw. They passed a cavernous room filled with rows of glass tanks. Inside, half-formed holograms flickered in the dark, faceless humanoid shapes practicing gestures of agony and rage. "What is this?" Marlowe whispered, recoiling. "Behavioral learning," Pip whispered back, his voice low. "The arena AI simulates emotional responses here before projecting them into the ring. It is practicing how to make the crowd feel things." It was a factory of artificial sentiment. Lyra felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The Concorde had automated everything, even the feeling of hate. They reached a vertical shaft that dropped into absolute darkness. The ladder rungs were rusted and slick with condensation. "We have to climb," Lyra said. "The lift sensors are active." The descent was grueling. The deeper they went, the heavier the air became. It pressed against their lungs, thick with a static charge that made the hair on Lyra's arms stand up. Halfway down, a security drone buzzed past the ventilation grate. They froze. Lyra and Rowan were pressed together in a narrow junction between two massive power conduits. The space was barely wide enough for one person, let alone two. Lyra's back was against the cold metal of the pipe, and Rowan was pressed against her, his body shielding her from the grate. They held their breath. The drone hovered, its red eyes scanning the darkness. The humming of the cables around them was a deafening roar, but in the tiny space between their bodies, the silence was absolute. Lyra could feel Rowan's heart beating against her chest. It was steady, rhythmic, a counterpoint to the racing pulse in her own throat. She looked up at him. In the gloom, his eyes were dark pools, reflecting the faint blue light of the conduits. He wasn't looking at the drone. He was looking at her. The proximity was overwhelming. The smell of him, sweat, old leather, and that strange, grounding scent of iron filled her senses. It was a moment of terrifying intimacy. They were two soldiers in a war that wanted them dead, hiding in the veins of a monster. And yet the only thing Lyra could focus on was the heat of his skin through his tunic. The drone moved on. Rowan didn't pull away immediately. He stayed there, his hands resting on the wall on either side of her head, boxing her in. "You are shaking," he whispered. "I am cold." Lyra lied. Rowan shifted his weight, pressing slightly closer. The friction of his body against hers sent a shockwave through her nervous system. "You are not cold," he said. "You are angry, and you are terrified." Lyra looked away, staring at the rivets on his collar. "My family," she whispered. The words came out before she could stop them. The secret she had carried for 3 years clawed its way up her throat. "We are not just nobles. Rowan, we are blood descendants of the precursors, the civilization that built the Oath engine." Rowan went still. "My father found out," Lyra continued, her voice trembling. "The engine reacts to our genetic markers. That is why Sarek killed him. He was afraid my father could command the machine. And now it is reacting to you. But I do not know why." She looked back at him, her violet eyes wide and vulnerable. Rowan looked at her for a long second. He lowered his head until his forehead rested against hers. "I am not just a soldier, Lyra," he said softly. Lyra blinked. "What?" "My unit," Rowan said. We were not infantry. I was a treaty security specialist. My entire training was to detect coercion. I spent 10 years sitting in rooms with warlords and diplomats, reading micro-expressions, listening to the cadence of lies. I was trained to know when a vow was false. He pulled back slightly, looking into her eyes. The engine reacts to intent, right? It reacts to truth. I have spent my whole life looking for truth in a room full of liars. Maybe the machine recognizes the habit. Lyra stared at him. It made perfect sense. The arena wasn't just reacting to his bravery, it was reacting to his perception. He was a living lie detector standing on a machine built to enforce honesty. The tension in the small space shifted. It was no longer just fear. It was a magnetic pull, a gravity that threatened to collapse the distance between them. Rowan's gaze dropped to her mouth, then back up. The restraint in his body was a physical thing, a coiled spring. If we survive this, Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the cables. If we survive this, Rowan said, his voice rough, we are going to have a very long conversation. He didn't kiss her. It would have been too easy, too chaotic. Instead, he took her hand and squeezed it hard, a promise made in the dark. We have to move, he said. The core of the arena was not a machine room. It was a cathedral of horror. They emerged from the maintenance shaft onto a catwalk that circled a massive, spherical chamber. The walls were lined with thousands of translucent hexagonal cells, like the comb of a hive. But instead of honey, the cells were filled with light, sickly, yellow-green light that pulsed and writhed like living fluid. Oren, the old engineer, gripped the railing, his face pale. I never saw the central reservoir, he whispered. I only built the intake manifolds. What is it? Marlowe asked, her voice hushed. Pip floated forward, scanning the tanks. It is bioelectric residue, Pip said. But specific. He flew closer to one of the cells. This one is shame, Pip said. Pure, concentrated humiliation. And that one. That is despair. Lyra looked at the vast glowing library of suffering. There were millions of gallons of it. This is the fuel, she realized. They harvest the crowd's mockery. They harvest the prisoner's fear. And they store it here. Rowan walked to the central console. It was a pedestal of white stone, identical to the seal in the ring above. A single data port glowed on its surface. Pip, Rowan said, get the data. The drone interfaced with the console. I am in, Pip said. I am downloading the schematics. The amendment vote. Oh, this is bad. What is it? Lyra asked, joining them at the console. The Human Accession Amendment, Pip said, his voice turning frantic. It is not just about voting rights. It is a mass activation protocol. If the vote passes, it authorizes the Concorde to link the Oath engine to the planetary communication grid. They are going to broadcast the energy? Lyra asked. They are going to broadcast a binding vow, Pip said. The engine can overwrite free will if the signal is strong enough. They are going to force every citizen in the Concorde to swear loyalty to the Chancellor. It is a mind control pulse, masquerading as a treaty. A silence fell over the group. It wasn't just slavery for Earth, it was slavery for everyone. Download it, Lyra ordered. All of it. We need to show the diplomats. I have got it, Pip said. Download complete. Good, a voice said from the shadows behind them. Lyra spun around. Standing at the entrance to the catwalk was Tallow, her trusted aide. He was holding a disruptor pistol. Behind him stood a squad of Sarek's elite guard. Tallow. Lyra breathed. I am sorry. Liaison, Tallow said. He didn't look sorry. He looked tired. But the Chancellor offered me a governorship. And you You are offering a suicide pact. Rowan moved, stepping in front of Lyra, but Talo raised the pistol. Do not be a hero, human, Talo said. The narrative is over. Fire, Talo ordered. The chaos was instantaneous. Marlowe, the dock worker, reacted first. She didn't have a weapon, but she had a wrench the size of a human leg. She threw it. It struck the nearest guard in the helmet, shattering his visor. Run! Rowan shouted. He grabbed Lyra and shoved her toward the emergency exit on the far side of the catwalk. Dr. Skick skittered sideways, spraying a cloud of blinding medical foam at the guards. Oren scrambled behind a control bank as plasma bolts sizzled through the air. They sprinted for the door. Pip zipped overhead, dodging fire. They burst out of the core chamber and into the exterior loading bay. The wind hit them like a physical blow. They were outside. The loading bay was a narrow platform suspended 2 miles above the city. There were no guardrails. Below them, the capital was a dizzying spin of light and clouds. There! Lyra pointed to a cluster of anti-grav cargo skiffs docked at the edge of the platform. They ran for the skiffs. The guards burst through the door behind them, firing wildly. A bolt clipped Rowan's shoulder, spinning him around. He stumbled, nearly falling off the edge. Rowan! Lyra screamed. She grabbed his jacket, hauling him back from the abyss. He groaned, clutching his shoulder. Go! Lyra yelled at the others. Marlowe and Dr. Skick jumped onto one skiff. Oren scrambled onto another. Lyra and Rowan threw themselves onto the last one. Lyra slammed her hand onto the ignition panel. The skiff hummed to life, lifting off the maglock with a lurch. Talo stepped onto the platform. He leveled his pistol at them. Goodbye. Lyra, he said. He fired. The bolt missed Lyra but hit the skiff's stabilizer fin. The small craft pitched violently to the right, spinning out of control. Hold on, Rowan roared, wrapping his good arm around Lyra's waist. The skiff plummeted. They fell through the layers of the city traffic. Holographic billboards flashed past in a blur. Sky bridges rushed up to meet them and then vanished upward. It was a terrifying corkscrew descent into the depths of the capital. Lyra fought the controls, her hands flying across the touchscreen. I cannot stabilize it, she screamed over the wind. The primary thruster is dead. We are going to crash, Rowan yelled. Aim for the lower tier, the industrial net. Lyra wrestled the yoke, forcing the spinning skiff toward the dark, smog-choked layer of the city that sat in the shadow of the upper world. They hit the safety netting of a waste processing district at 200 miles an hour. The netting caught them, stretching and snapping. The skiff tumbled, shearing off metal, and crashed onto a rooftop covered in neon-lit moss. Silence. Lyra coughed, pushing the airbag aside. She was bruised, shaking, but alive. Rowan? He was groaning beside her, pulling himself out of the wreckage. I am okay, he wheezed. I think. They crawled out of the ruined skiff. Marlowe and the others had landed on an adjacent roof, waving to signal they were safe. Lyra looked around. They were in the lower city. It was a different world. The gleaming chrome of the upper city was gone, replaced by rusted iron and patchwork plastic. The air smelled of frying oil and chemical rain. And the people. Crowds of aliens, species Lyra had only seen in textbooks, stopped to stare at them. There were four-armed workers carrying crates, amphibious families huddled under heat lamps, and ragged children with scales and fur watching the burning skiff with wide eyes. A massive screen on the side of a tenement building flickered to life. It was the Concord news feed. But here, the propaganda was different. It wasn't about glory, it was about obedience. Report descent, the screen flashed. Compliance is protection. Rowan stood up, holding his bleeding shoulder. He looked at the faces in the crowd, and they looked tired, and they looked scared. They looked exactly like the humans in the holding cells. He walked to the edge of the roof, looking down at the sprawling, infinite slum that supported the paradise above. "I thought it was us against them," Rowan said quietly. "Humans against the aliens." He turned to Lyra. "But it is not. It is just power against everyone else." Lyra stood beside him. She saw a Varen worker in the crowd, one of her own species but poor, wearing rags, looking at her with the same fear as the rest. "You are right," she said. "They are trapped in the arena too. They just do not know it." Pip floated up from the wreckage, his casing dented and smoking. "Well," the drone said, his voice glitching slightly. "The good news is, we have the data. The bad news is my navigation sensors are fried, and we are currently parked in the bad neighborhood of a floating city." Lyra looked at the drone. She wiped soot from her face, and then she started to laugh. It was a ragged, hysterical sound, born of adrenaline and survival. "Pip," she said, choking on the laughter, "now is not the moment for puns." "Disagree," Pip chirped. "Puns are a coping mechanism. I am coping." The laughter died as the screens on the tenement building shifted. The propaganda vanished. Volseric's face appeared. He looked composed, but his eyes were manic. "Citizens of the Concord," Sarek announced, his voice booming through the smog. "Tonight, we have witnessed a tragedy. Terrorists have attempted to sabotage our sacred games, but they have failed." Lyra stepped closer to the screen. "To prove the strength of our resolve," Sarek continued, "the final vote on the amendment will take place tomorrow, immediately following the grand finale." The image shifted. It showed a new opponent. It wasn't a beast. It wasn't a cyborg. It was a Varen in white armor, holding a lance of pure energy. The Spiral's perfect champion. The human Rowan Hale is a fugitive. Sarek said, "But he will return, because I am issuing a challenge. If he defeats the perfect champion, he earns the audience blessing. Humanity will be spared the vote. But if he fails, or if he refuses to show, the amendment passes by default, and Earth will be burned." It was a trap, a blatant, desperate trap. "Sarek knows," Lyra whispered. "He knows we have the data. He wants to draw us out." Rowan watched the screen. "If we release the data now," Rowan said, "Sarek will claim it is fake. He controls the media. He controls the narrative." "So what do we do?" Marlowe yelled from the other roof. "We run? We hide?" Rowan shook his head. "The Oath Engine," he said. "What about it?" Lyra asked. "It broadcasts intent," Rowan said. "It broadcasts truth. If I step onto that seal, and if I make a vow while the engine is active, it won't just be a broadcast, it will be reality." Pip whirred. "Warning," the drone said. "My analysis of the precursor log suggests a risk. If you engage the engine with a binding vow to counter the mass control pulse, the feedback loop could be permanent." "Permanent how?" Lyra asked. "It binds the vower to the vow," Pip said. "If you vow to break the system, you become the instrument of that break. You might not be able to leave. You might not be able to stop. And anyone standing with you, they get bound too." Rowan looked at Lyra. "You do not have to come with me," he said. Lyra looked at the burning skyline. She looked at the data shard in her hand. Then she looked at the man who had refused to become a monster. Safety was a lie. The only thing that was real was the cliff edge and the person standing next to you. "We are not running," Lyra said. She took Rowan's hand. "We are going back, not to win a match." Rowan squeezed her hand, his eyes burning with a cold, terrifying resolve. "No," he said. We are going back to detonate a revolution. The Undercity did not sleep, but tonight it held its breath. In the rusted sprawl beneath the floating capital, the air was thick with the smell of ozone and insurrection. The preparations were not the organized maneuvers of an army. They were the desperate, chaotic twitching of a dying beast trying to find its feet. Marlowe stood on a crate in the center of the loading district, her voice a low rumble that cut through the steam venting from the overhead pipes. She was coordinating the dock workers, the waste haulers, and the maintenance drones, the invisible millions who kept the city aloft. "We do not need to win a war," Marlowe told the union leaders gathered around her. "We just need to be loud. When the signal drops, every turbine in Sector 4 goes offline. We cut the power to the luxury suites. We make them look at us." In a repurposed medical storage closet, Dr. Skick was vibrating with nervous energy. His 4 hands moved in a blur, mixing adrenaline compounds and neural blockers. He was not building a weapon, he was building a survival kit. Beside him, Pip hovered over a stolen data terminal, his optical sensor spinning red. "I am scheduling a leak bomb," the drone muttered, his usual sarcasm replaced by frantic processing speed. "Every screen, every data pad, every retinal implant in the city. But the encryption on the main relay is dense. It is like trying to shout through a lead wall. I need the oath engine to amplify the signal, or this is just a whisper in a hurricane." Deeper in the shadows, in a makeshift gym cleared out of a collapsed tunnel, Rowan Hale was not lifting weights. He was not hitting a bag. He was sitting on the floor, eyes closed, listening to a metronome he had set on a crate. Click, click, click. He was breathing in a slow, deep rhythm. He was not training his muscles. His muscles were already as ready as they would ever be. He was training his nervous system. He was learning to lower his heart rate, to quiet the adrenaline spike that came with terror. The oath engine required coherent intent. It demanded absolute, unshakable truth. If he stepped onto that seal with panic in his blood, the machine would read it as dissonance. It would fry his brain before he could speak a single word. He had to be calmer than the chaos. He had to be the eye of the storm. High above, in the chrome and glass amphitheater of the Concord High Council, Lyra Vesh was fighting a different kind of war. The chamber was a masterpiece of intimidation. The seats were arranged in a steep semicircle, looking down on the speaker's podium. The lighting was designed to make the accused look small and the judges look divine. Lyra stood at the podium. She wore the formal whites of her house, a sharp contrast to the flight suit she had worn in the tunnels. She looked every inch the aristocrat, but her eyes were hard. "The motion is irregular," Lyra said, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the gathered diplomats. "The Human Accession Amendment requires a unanimous quorum. The representative from the Outer Rim is absent." A reptilian ambassador leaned forward, his holographic translator buzzing. "The representative is delayed. Liaison Vesh. The vote proceeds by emergency decree. Chancellor Sarek has authorized it." "The Chancellor authorizes a great many things," Lyra shot back, her tone dripping with polite venom. "Including, it seems, the rewriting of our Constitution to suit his schedule. Is the Concord a government of laws, or is it merely a fan club for a man who likes to watch executions?" The chamber erupted in outrage. "You overstep, liaison!" the presiding minister shouted. "Your family's standing is already precarious. Do not test the patience of this council." Lyra gripped the podium. She checked the time on her internal display. She needed 20 minutes. She needed to keep them talking, keep them angry, keep them from finalizing the seal on the document that would enslave Earth. "I am not testing your patience," Lyra said, smoothing her voice into a dangerous purr. I am testing your literacy. Article 7, Section 9. No treaty may be ratified while a challenge of blood is active in the arena. As long as Rowan Hale stands, this vote is illegal. Hale is a fugitive, the minister roared. He has forfeited the challenge. Has he? Lyra asked. The event has not begun. Until the bell rings and the champion stands alone, the challenge is open. Or are you afraid that a single human might actually win? She saw the hesitation in their faces. They were bureaucrats. They feared procedural errors more than they feared morality. She had bought 5 minutes. She needed 15 more. The staging area was a service corridor beneath the arena's north gate. It was cold, dark, and smelled of the chemical accelerants used for the pyrotechnics. Lyra slipped through the maintenance hatch, breathless. She had left the council chamber in an uproar, citing a security emergency. Rowan was waiting for her. He was dressed in the simple canvas trousers of a prisoner, stripped to the waist. His body was a map of the last month, bruises fading into yellow, fresh scars, the burn mark on his shoulder from the skiff crash. He looked up as she entered. The stoicism he wore like armor cracked, just for a second. You are late, he said softly. I enjoy making an entrance, Lyra said. She walked to him, her steps echoing on the metal grating. They stood facing each other in the dim light. The noise of the crowd above was a dull roar, vibrating through the ceiling. In a few minutes, he would walk out there to die. In a few minutes, she would destroy her life to save him. The reality of it hit them both at the same time. I am terrified, Lyra admitted. The confession came out as a whisper. I stood in front of the council and lied to their faces, and I did not blink. But looking at you, thinking about you walking into that light. I know, Rowan said. He reached out, his hand hovering near her waist before he pulled her in. It is easier when it is just survival. Survival is simple. You run, you fight, you eat. He looked down at her, his eyes searching hers. But this, he said, wanting something, wanting a future, that is heavy. It is a liability, Lyra said, her voice shaking. Love is a liability in the arena. It gives them something to hurt. Then let them try, Rowan said. He kissed her. It was not the desperate collision of the balcony, and it was slow, deliberate, and aching with the knowledge of what was coming. It was a kiss that tasted of goodbyes and hellos tangled together. It was grounding, as it pulled them out of the abstract terror of the future and anchored them in the immediate, physical now. Lyra pulled back, her hands resting on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. She needed to remember that rhythm. Listen to me, she said, her voice fierce. No martyrdom. You do not die to make a point. You do not die to save me. If we do this, we do it together. We walk out, or we burn it down. But we do not trade lives. Rowan nodded. He took her hand, squeezing it hard enough to bruise. Together, he said. No martyrdom. The gates began to grind open. The light from the arena floor spilled into the tunnel, blindingly white. Go, Lyra whispered. I have a system to hack. Rowan turned and walked into the light. The grand spiral arena was a cauldron of noise. Tonight, the Concord had outdone itself. The chrome banners were 50 feet tall, streaming with holographic ribbons. Orbiting cameras swooped through the air like birds of prey. The crowd was packed shoulder to shoulder, a sea of faces stretching up into the darkness. But the sound was different. From the upper tiers, the wealthy Varen elite chanted for blood. End the error! End the error! But from the lower tiers, the workers, the servants, the outcasts, a different sound was rising. It was a rhythmic stomping of feet. Boom, boom, boom. The announcer's voice cut through the din, amplified to godlike proportions. Citizens, we stand at the precipice of history. The savage past knocks at our door, begging for entry, but we say no. The script appeared on the giant screens. It was the line, the propaganda line. Galactic arena crowds mocked human warriors. The announcer boomed. Usually the crowd would finish it with laughter, but tonight, the lower tiers roared back, until one stepped into the ring. The sound shook the floating stadium. It was defiance. It was a reclamation. Rowan walked to the center of the ring. He looked small against the scale of the architecture. He stopped on the obsidian tiles, 10 yards from the center seal. Opposite him, the gate opened. The spiral's perfect champion emerged. It was a Varen male, clad in white ceremonial armor that glowed with internal light. He held an energy lance that hummed with lethal power. He was beautiful, precise, and utterly deadly. "Begin!" the announcer screamed. The champion lunged. Rowan moved to dodge, but his feet didn't leave the ground. A sudden crushing weight slammed him into the tiles, gravity spikes, in the Chancellor's private box. Volseric watched with a thin, cruel smile. His hand was hovering over a hidden console built into his armrest. "Did you think I would leave it to chance?" Sarek whispered. Rowan struggled to push himself up, but the gravity around him had increased 5-fold. His bones creaked, his vision blurred. The champion walked casually toward him, raising the lance. Then the pain started. Sarek tapped another key. The neural amplifiers embedded in the arena floor, the ones usually used to heighten adrenaline, shrieked into overdrive. They targeted Rowan's nervous system, turning every nerve ending into a live wire. Rowan screamed. It was a sound of pure, white-hot agony. He curled into a ball, his muscles spasming. "Look at him!" Sarek's voice boomed over the private comms to the diplomats. "Look at the weakness!" High above, in the exposed control lattice of the announcer's booth, Lyra Vesh slammed her hands onto the manual override terminal. "No," she hissed. She began to type. She didn't bother with stealth. She didn't bother with routing her signal through proxies. She brute-forced the connection, using her own biometric codes to slash through the firewalls. On the massive screens above the arena, the image of the champion faltered. It was replaced by a live feed of Lyra's face, illuminated by the blue light of the terminal. "He is cheating." Lyra's voice rang out over the stadium speakers, raw and furious. "The gravity is rigged. The neural dampeners are active. Look at the readings." She threw the telemetry data onto the screens. Graphs showing the gravity spike and the pain signals flashed in red. The crowd gasped. Even the elite in the upper tiers went silent. Rigging a match was common, but doing it so clumsily, so visibly, it was an insult to the sport. "Security!" Sarek screamed into his comms. "Get her! Kill her!" Guards in the booth turned, raising their rifles. Lyra saw them in her peripheral vision. She didn't stop typing. She locked the gravity controls and smashed the execute key. "Get up! Rowan!" she screamed into the microphone. The gravity well collapsed. Rowan gasped, the crushing weight vanishing. He was still in agony, his nerves firing randomly, but he could move. He saw the champion swinging the lance. Rowan rolled. The lance struck the stone where his head had been a fraction of a second before. He didn't try to fight the champion. He didn't try to disarm him. Rowan scrambled toward the center seal. He was bleeding from his nose and ears. His vision was tunneling, but he could feel the hum of the machine beneath the floor. It was singing to him. The champion turned, raising the lance for a killing thrust. Rowan threw himself onto the white stone seal. He slammed his hand onto the surface. "I am here," Rowan shouted. His voice was cracked, broken, but the acoustic pickups caught it. The champion froze, confused by the lack of defense. Rowan looked up. He looked at the camera drone hovering above him. He looked at the millions of people watching. "I refuse to fight for your amusement," Rowan yelled. "I refuse the humiliation." The seal began to glow. A low vibration started in the floor, shaking the dust from the cracks. "I demand the truth be witnessed." The light intensified. It wasn't just light anymore. It was a physical force, a wind of aurora energy that whipped Rowan's hair back. Rowan looked at the crowd. He looked at the faces of the workers, the nobles, the soldiers. "Decide," he roared. "Are you an audience, or are you accomplices?" The oath engine ignited. It was not a beam. It was an explosion of absolute reality. A wave of violet light swept out from the center of the arena, passing through the champion, passing through the walls, passing through the city itself. Every screen in the Capitol, from the giant banners to the personal data pads in the pockets of the diplomats, turned white. Then, the data Pip had queued hit the stream. Amplified by the engine, the files decrypted instantly. Documents flashed across the sky, financial records showing the bribes paid to the council, video logs of the torture protocols used to harvest energy, the full text of the Human Accession Amendment, with the hidden clauses about mind control highlighted in burning red. And then, a video file. It was grainy. It was old. It showed a hangar bay. It showed Vol Sarek, 5 years younger, handing a credit chip to a mechanic. "Disable the sensors on Vesh's shuttle," the Sarek in the video said. "Make it look like pilot error. We cannot have him digging into the engine's lineage." The silence in the arena was absolute. Lyra, standing in the booth with guns pointed at her back, watched the screen. She saw her father's murder confirmed. She saw the face of the man who had comforted her at the funeral, giving the order to kill him. It felt like a physical blow, a knife to the gut. But it also felt like air. It was the truth. Finally, it was the truth. In the Chancellor's box. Sarek stood frozen. The color had drained from his face. He looked at the diplomats around him. They were backing away. The engine was not done. The violet light swirled around Rowan, lifting him to his feet. He wasn't controlling it. He was the anchor. The light shot upward, piercing the clouds, broadcasting the signal to the orbiting relays. "The vow is witnessed." The ancient voice of the machine spoke, not in words, but in thoughts that appeared in the minds of everyone present. "The contract is broken." Chaos erupted. In the lower tiers, the workers surged forward, tearing down the barriers. In the upper tiers, the elite panicked, scrambling for the exits. Security forces on the arena floor hesitated. Half of them turned their weapons on the crowd. The other half, seeing the truth of their own enslavement on the screens, lowered their guns. In the political chamber, the vote froze. The holograms flickered and died. Lyra spun around to face the guards in the booth. They looked at the screen, then at her. The captain of the guard lowered his rifle. "Go," he said quietly. Lyra didn't wait. She ran for the door. Down in the ring, the perfect champion dropped his lance. He looked at his hands, then at the human standing in the pillar of light. The fight was over. The war had just begun. Rowan stood in the center of the storm. He was bleeding. He was shaking, but he was standing. The oath engine roared, a beacon of terrifying truth, signaling the end of the Varen Concord's golden lie. The Grand Spiral Arena had ceased to be a stadium. It had become a singularity. The pillar of violet light erupting from the center seal was not merely illumination. It was a physical force, a roaring column of bioelectric resonance that tore through the artificial sky and screamed into the vacuum of space. The air inside the dome tasted of copper and ancient dust, the smell of a tomb that had been cracked open to reveal a sun. In the eye of this hurricane, the conflict had shifted. It was no longer a sporting event. It was a collision between two fundamental laws of physics: the desperate, clawing need for control, and the unstoppable, terrifying velocity of the truth. Chancellor Vol Sarek was not a man who accepted defeat. As the screens above the city broadcast his crimes, the bribes, the murders, the secret treaties, he did not flee. Panic was for the poor. Sarek felt only a cold, crystalline rage. He shoved past his stunned aides in the executive box, moving toward the emergency lift that descended directly to the arena's core control deck. "The narrative is not yours to write," Sarek hissed, his voice trembling with the force of his denial. "The engine belongs to the Concorde. It belongs to me." He had a contingency. He always had a contingency. If the Human Accession Amendment could not be passed by vote, he would force it by metaphysical decree. He would seize the manual interface of the Oath Engine and speak a unity vow. He would compel the machine to bind every mind in the city to a single, overriding command: obey. It was madness, but to a man watching his empire crumble, it looked like salvation. Down in the ring, the atmosphere was suffocating. Rowan Hale stood near the center seal, the aurora light washing over him, turning his bruised skin into a landscape of shadows and violet fire. His left arm hung useless at his side, the bone shattered. His chest heaved with the effort of remaining upright. 10 yards away, the Spiral's perfect champion had recovered his weapon. The champion was confused. His tactical display was flashing errors. The crowd was not cheering. The gravity was not shifting. But the kill command in his neural implant was still active, a burning imperative that overrode all confusion. Eliminate the anomaly. The champion charged. Rowan did not assume a fighting stance. He did not raise his good fist. He simply watched the white-armored gladiator close the distance. The crowd, sensing the impending violence, went silent. They had seen 1,000 executions on this floor. They knew the rhythm of death. But Rowan broke the rhythm. As the champion thrust the energy lance, a strike aimed perfectly at Rowan's heart. Rowan stepped inside the guard. It was suicide. It was the wrong range. But Rowan didn't strike. He used his good hand to grab the shaft of the lance, not to stop it, but to guide it. He pivoted, using the champion's own momentum to send the lance tip driving into the stone floor. Sparks showered them. The champion stumbled, his grip on the weapon broken. Rowan was behind him now. In any other match, this was the moment for the neck snap, the kidney strike, the ending. Rowan did nothing. He stepped back. He stood with his empty hand open, palm out. "I am not your enemy," Rowan said. His voice was hoarse, barely audible over the hum of the engine. The champion whirled around, drawing a short blade from his hip. His helmet mask betrayed no emotion, but his movements were jagged, frantic. The neural implant was shocking him, punishing him for the failure. He slashed at Rowan's throat. Rowan ducked, the blade singing through the air where his artery had been. He swept the champion's leg, not to break the knee, but to off-balance him. The champion fell hard onto the obsidian tiles. Rowan stood over him. "Kill him!" a voice screamed from the upper tier, a lone, desperate loyalist trying to remember the old world. But the cry died in the throat of the silence. Rowan looked down at the fallen gladiator. He saw the tremors in the man's hands. He saw the sweat dripping from the chin of the helmet. He saw the slave beneath the armor. Rowan knelt. He didn't strike. He reached out and offered his hand. "Stand up," Rowan said. "You do not have to do this." The champion froze. The logic of the arena had shattered. In this place, mercy was a weakness. Mercy was a glitch. But here, in the violet light of the Oath Engine, mercy looked like something else. It looked like power. The champion stared at the human's hand. The kill command in his head shrieked, but the reality in front of him was louder. The crowd watched, hypnotized. They were seeing a man refuse to be a killer. They were seeing dignity contagious enough to stop a war. Lyra Vesh was running. She sprinted through the labyrinth of the lower maintenance decks, dodging the confused security patrols. Her objective was the manual interface, the physical altar where the precursors had once stood to bind their kings. She knew Sarek was heading there. She knew what he intended to do. She turned a corner, her boots sliding on the grate, and ran straight into a wall of black armor. It was the Chancellor's personal guard. Lyra skidded to a halt, reaching for the pistol she had stolen, but it was too late. A heavy gauntlet struck her wrist, sending the weapon clattering into the dark. Two guards grabbed her arms, pinning her against the bulkhead. Vol Sarek stepped out from behind them. He looked unraveled. His hair was disheveled, his eyes wide and bloodshot. He held a disruptor in one hand and a portable interface key in the other. "Liaison Vesh," Sarek said, his voice tight. "Always the disappointing daughter. You really thought you could outshout history? History is done with you, Vol." Lyra spat, struggling against the guards. "The city knows. The council knows. It is over." "Nothing is over until I speak," Sarek said. "Bring her. She can be the first witness to the new order." They dragged her toward the core chamber. The room was vast, dominated by the humming machinery of the Oath Engine. The air here was so charged with bioelectricity that the hairs on Lyra's arms stood straight up. In the center of the room was the master console, a pedestal of white stone directly beneath the arena floor. Sarek marched to the pedestal. He slotted the interface key. The console lit up, accepting his biometric override. "Connect me to the global address system." Sarek ordered his guards. "Open a channel to every mind in the Concord." "Sir?" One of the guards hesitated. "The system is unstable, the feedback." "Do it!" Sarek screamed. The guard tapped his wrist console. A red light blinked on the pedestal. The mic was open. The engine was listening, ready to amplify the voice of authority to the entire planet. Lyra looked at the machine. She looked at the blue pulses of light racing through the conduits. Pip's voice echoed in her memory. "It detects truth of intent." Sarek cleared his throat. He prepared to speak the words that would enslave a civilization. "Citizens of the Concord," Sarek began, his voice booming through the speakers of the city, echoing in the arena above. "We are under attack by chaos. To preserve our society, I hereby vow." Lyra lunged forward. She didn't try to break free. She slumped, forcing the guards to adjust their grip. "You are afraid," she shouted. Her voice cracked like a whip in the echo chamber. Sarek stopped. He glared at her. "I am the Chancellor. I am fear itself." "You are a coward," Lyra yelled, looking directly at him, her violet eyes burning. "You killed my father because you were terrified he would find out you are a fraud. You built this arena because you are scared of anything you cannot control. Admit it, Vol. You do not want unity. You want silence." Sarek's face twisted. He forgot the open mic. He forgot the millions listening. He forgot the ancient machine that was currently reading his heartbeat, his sweat, and the electrical impulses of his brain. "I want order," Sarek roared, leaning over the console. "I want a galaxy where the weak do not question the strong. I want absolute submission. I want to crush this pathetic rebellion until no one dares to speak above a whisper. I am the law. I am the Concord." The oath engine pulsed. It heard him. It did not hear a vow of protection. It did not hear a promise of service. It heard a tyrant declaring war on his own people. The light in the chamber shifted from violet to a harsh, angry crimson. In the upper control lattice, a tiny black drone hovered over the primary security board. Pip was having the time of his life. "This is Commander Stern," Pip announced, modulating his voice to a perfect gruff baritone over the tactical channel. "All units, we have a code purple. That means, everyone arrest yourselves immediately. It is a drill, a very serious drill. Thank you for your cooperation." On the screens, Pip watched 3 squads of bewildered guards actually look at each other and lower their weapons. Human psychology, Pip muttered to himself. So wonderfully glitchy. Then, the red light of the oath engine flooded the system. The crimson light exploded from the center seal in the arena, knocking Rowan and the champion off their feet. Below, in the core chamber, Vol Sarek screamed. The machine was rejecting him. The unity vow he had tried to initiate had collided with the truth of his intent, malice, greed, and fear. The dissonance created a bioelectric feedback loop. Bolts of red energy arced from the pedestal, striking Sarek in the chest. He was thrown backward, crashing into the bulkhead. The interface key melted in the lock. The guards released Lyra, backing away in terror as their own armor began to spark and malfunction, the control chips frying in the presence of the raw surge. Lyra scrambled to her feet. She looked at Sarek. He was alive, but he was broken. He lay on the floor gasping, his uniform scorched, his eyes wide with the realization that the universe had finally told him no. Lyra turned to the pedestal. The light was still chaotic, pulsing dangerously. The engine was awake, and it was angry. It needed a resolution. It needed an anchor. Lyra ran to the console. She placed her hands on the white stone. It was hot, vibrating with the energy of 1,000 years of silent judgment. She realized then what the engine demanded. It wasn't enough to expose the lie. Someone had to speak the truth, and not just a small truth, a binding truth. A vow that would cost something. Rowan had started the reaction by refusing to be a victim. Lyra had to finish it by refusing to be a master. She looked up at the ceiling, imagining the crowds above, the city beyond, the millions of souls waiting for an answer. "I am Lyra Vesh," she said. Her voice was not amplified by speakers. It was carried by the light. It resonated in the bones of everyone who stood on the station. "I am the daughter of this house," Lyra said, "and I speak for the blood of the builders." The crimson light began to settle, softening back into violet. The machine was listening. "I vow," Lyra said, her voice shaking but clear, "that this arena will never again be a place of death. It will be dismantled. Or it will be rebuilt as a place of voluntary sport, where no life is taken for profit." The light pulsed brighter, accepted. "I vow," she continued, tears streaming down her face as she felt the weight of the promise bind itself to her DNA. "That the human accession amendment is void. The vote will be rerun, publicly, with every species watching, with no secrets." Brighter still, accepted. "And I vow," Lyra cried out, pouring every ounce of her grief and hope into the stone, "that no world, no species, and no person will ever again be reduced to property in the Concord. We are not masters. We are not meat. We are alive." The oath engine roared. It was a sound of release. The energy that had been trapped in the reservoirs, the shame, the fear, the despair, was transmuted. It flooded out of the tanks, rushing up through the conduits, erupting into the sky not as a weapon, but as a firework display of pure, cleansing intention. The feedback loop collapsed, the control network that bound the slaves, the security drones, and the government chips shattered, in the corner. Sarek watched his empire evaporate. Lyra slumped against the console, exhausted, emptied, and freer than she had ever been. The silence that followed was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of a fever breaking. In the arena, the crowd looked around. The barriers were down. The guards had dropped their weapons. The perfect champion was sitting on the floor, his helmet off, revealing the sweaty, confused face of a young man who didn't know who he was anymore. Rowan stood in the center. The light had faded to a gentle, ambient glow. He looked up at the announcer's booth. He looked down at the floor. He sat down. The medical teams arrived minutes later, but they weren't the Concord's butchers. They were Dr. Skick and a team of insectoid medics, swarming over the wounded with sprays and bandages. Marlowe and her dock workers secured the exits, not to keep people in, but to let them out. Lyra came up the lift. She walked across the obsidian tiles. She was limping. Her white uniform was stained with grease and soot. She looked like a disaster. She looked beautiful. Rowan looked up as she approached. He didn't stand. He couldn't. His body had finally gotten the memo that the war was over, and every muscle had decided to quit at once. Lyra knelt beside him. She didn't say anything. She just reached out and took his hand. His good hand. They sat there in the middle of the wreckage of the Grand Spiral Arena. The crowd watched them, not with mockery, not with bloodlust, but with a strange, quiet reverence. They were witnessing the only thing more shocking than violence: intimacy. Rowan leaned his forehead against hers. He was trembling. She was shaking. It wasn't romantic in the storybook sense. It was the raw, jagged relief of two people who had held their breath for a month and finally exhaled. "You are loud," Rowan whispered, his voice cracking. "When you make a vow—" "I wanted to be sure they heard me," Lyra whispered back, tears dripping off her nose. "They heard you," Rowan said. "The whole galaxy heard you." He squeezed her hand. "We are alive," he said. It sounded like a question. Lyra closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his skin, the smell of the ozone, the hum of the city that was waking up from a long nightmare. "Yes," she said, "we are alive." The days that followed were a blur of tribunals, treaties, and the messy, complicated work of freedom. Vol Sarek was not executed. He was put on trial in the very chamber he had tried to silence. The footage of his confession, amplified by the engine, made his defense impossible. He was sentenced to life in the helium mines of the Outer Belt, the same fate he had once threatened Rowan with. There was a poetic justice to it that Pip found endless delight in. The Grand Spiral Arena was not destroyed. The people voted to keep it. They stripped out the pain amplifiers, the gravity spikes, and the hard light cages. They turned it into a true stadium, a place where athletes came to test themselves, not to die. The oath engine remained. It went dormant, a silent guardian beneath the floor, a reminder that truth was always listening. 2 weeks after the revolution, Lyra stood on the observation deck of the spaceport. The sky was a deep, bruised purple. Ships were docking and departing, trade vessels from Earth, diplomatic cruisers from the Rim. The blockade was gone. Rowan walked up beside her. He was wearing a new jacket, stiff leather that didn't quite fit his shoulders yet. His arm was in a sling, but the doctors said the nerve damage would heal. "They offered me the job," Lyra said, not looking away from the window. "The Reform Council. They want me to oversee the dismantling of the old laws." "It is a good job," Rowan said. "You would be good at it. Terrifying, but good." Lyra smiled, a small, genuine thing. "And the Earth delegation? Did they offer you the ambassadorship?" Rowan laughed. "They did. They said I have a knack for cross-cultural communication, which I think means I am good at getting punched in the face until people feel bad for me. Lyra turned to face him. The wind on the deck whipped her hair across her face. "So," she said, "Ambassador Hale, Councilwoman Vesh. Is that the ending?" Rowan looked at the ships rising into the atmosphere. He looked at the vast, terrifying expanse of stars that the Concorde had tried to map and control. "I think," Rowan said slowly, "that I have spent enough time in rooms where people talk about rules." "Me too," Lyra admitted. "I promised to fix the system. I did not promise to run it." Rowan reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 tickets. They weren't for a diplomatic cruiser. They were for a deep space scout vessel, headed for the uncharted sectors beyond the rim. "Pip says there are ruins out there," Rowan said. "More engines, more history that Sarek tried to erase. Someone should go find them." Lyra looked at the tickets. Then she looked at Rowan. The attraction between them hadn't faded. It had settled into something stronger, something built on the bedrock of what they had survived. It was no longer the frantic heat of the chase. It was the steady warmth of a home they carried with them. "A partner," Lyra said, echoing his words from the medical bay. "A partner," Rowan confirmed. She took the ticket. "You know," she said, arching an eyebrow, "I am technically royalty. I do not do economy class." "It is a scout ship, Lyra." Rowan grinned. "The whole thing is economy class. But I promise I will let you have the top bunk." They walked toward the gate together. They didn't look back at the city. They didn't look back at the arena. They walked into the uncertain, messy, beautiful future, bound not by chains and not by the machine beneath the floor. They were bound by the only vow that mattered, the one they chose,